The Money was one of the first episodes that I can remember off the top of my head that I feel the title was kind of a theme for most of the stories, and not really just one. Which, again, I know that Jerry never wanted the writers to focus on creative show titles, but to me it's one of those ones where it's like, it was a theme, rather than just like, like a one, story thing. Making it like an okay episode. The story here is Jerry's parents were in town visiting, yet again. They've been visiting a lot lately, I feel like. And they're first trying to tell Jerry, how would you think if we bought back the Cadillac? This episode also kind of had like several throwbacks. They call it kind of like the sequel of the Cadillac episode from last season. Of course, we also get some throwbacks with the astronaut pen. And with the Costanzas going to consider moving to Florida. And a few other things I feel like off the top of my head. But anyways, so they're saying how we feel about us buying the Cadillac, until he finds out that they had already sold it for $6,000 to Jack Klompus, which irks Jerry big time. So he then plots for a way, and then the thing is also is they wanted to give Jerry the check for $6,000 the check for $6,000 that they got from Klompus to buy the Cadillac back. To which Jerry's like, I don't need this. And then first off, Jerry thinks they're only doing this because he had that bounced check recently in the Little Jerry episode, another throwback. But also because Mrs. Seinfeld claims she read something recently that stand-up comedy is not what it used to be, and basically saying that they don't think that Jerry's financially stable. So Jerry then plots for an idea to sneak down to Florida to buy back the Cadillac from Klompus. Kramer, meanwhile, is having some lady problems. His girlfriend Emily, she's excellent in bed, except for when they sleep. She's got the Jimmy legs. And of course, he goes to Elaine for advice, while of course Elaine is at work in charge of the Peterman office. For now. Basically, she tells him that he has to be, straightforward with her and whatnot, with what he wants. He really likes her, but he can't sleep with her because he's going to be up all night. Meanwhile, Elaine also is, just raving how much she loves her position because this Peterman stock options are going up really high. So she's been getting a lot of money recently, especially when, the stock options are hers, so she gets a lot of the money. So George begins thinking that Elaine's sticking it to him because when they went out for some coffee, she bought him his coffee. So that's when, obviously with, Elaine getting the stock thing and then Jerry's parents, selling the Cadillac and whatnot, that leaves George wondering, of course, how much you think his parents actually have. To really think they have much. To find out, though, that they actually do have a lot. A lot of money that George thought he could inherit. So, of course, based off of a talk he had with his parents, George's parents, out of the blue, decide they don't think they have much time left. They want to just blow out all their money. They bought themselves a Cadillac. They were going out to a fancy dinner. And they even started to consider, a second time, to move to Florida, yet again, to Del Boca Vista. So, but of course, they're going to leave it up to George. If they stay, his parents drive him nuts, but he's rich. But if they leave, they don't drive him nuts, and he's poor. So he's stuck. He does not know what to do. So meanwhile, Jerry sneaks down to Florida. He comes up with some lies saying that Bally's in Atlantic City called, and they had a cancellation, and he needs someone to come fill in. So he flew down to Florida to meet with Klompus. Who agreed to sell him back the Cadillac. Of course, Jerry originally offered $9,000. He turned it down. He wants $22,000, and then Jerry finally offers him $14,000, and they settle on $14,000. And of course, Jerry had a hard time trying to get his pen to work, and he just needs a pen. And Klompus pulls out the old-fashioned astronaut pen, and he mentions that it still works, but he needed the car for one more day because he was going to drive his wife to Naples. So Jerry flies home. The Cadillac's back, whether his parents like it or not. But he didn't tell his parents yet. While he's there, of course, Columbus calls him again. He says he had a little accident. The Cadillac drove into the swamp. So Jerry has to go back down again. And now the thing is, though, is he had to try to find a way to cover up because Kramer came over. He wanted to borrow something while Jerry was gone the first time. He called over the Bally's, found out that Jerry wasn't there. Well, Jerry then lied and said that he was registered under a different name and not Jerry Seinfeld. So that's why they couldn't track him down. So then, of course, Jerry goes back down again. And now his parents are starting to think that they may have to start providing for him. So they went out to dinner, actually, because George, to, somewhat get back at Elaine for him thinking that Elaine was sticking it to him. George took them all, took the Seinfelds and Elaine out to dinner. And Jerry when he got back, of course. Morty finds out that Elaine is president of the Peterman catalog. So, to help get money, because he thinks he has to provide for Jerry, he then goes to Elaine trying to get a job. Which Elaine's like, you work in Florida. He goes, I can work out of the house and have a Kinko's nearby. And then he also mentions how, he thinks he's qualified because he sold, clothes for like 30 some years or whatnot. He says he thinks his resume speaks for itself, but yet he had to mail a resume when he got home. So she said, well, find something for you to do. But as that happens, guess who comes walking in? Peterman. Like nothing ever happened. He's back. And he's back to take over his old position. Elaine, of course, gets knocked back to her old position and her original salary. So all of that stock is gone. That money now goes to J. Peterman himself. And of course, he doesn't seem too big of a fan of Morty Seinfeld at first. But Peterman's allowed Morty to call him Jacobo, which I think is his real first name, which also, of course, drives Elaine nuts. So now Elaine needs an idea of how to, of how to get rid of Mr. Seinfeld. Make him want to quit. So, of course, she goes to see George because Jerry went back down to see Columbus because the car drove the car into the swamp. Of course, funny thing was Jerry shows up. First thing Columbus says is, "What took you so long?" And Jerry goes, "I live in New York." And, of course, Columbus made Jerry clean because he didn't say he drove to the swamp. He said it drove itself into the swamp. And beyond all that, he lost his pen. And Jerry made some, snarky remark regarding the pen, which Columbus didn't like. Because even after Jerry got the car cleaned, Columbus didn't let him stay in his place. Jerry's credit cards were all maxed out, so he had nowhere to stay. So since Columbus wouldn't let him stay, Jerry ends up falling asleep in the Cadillac. Which then, of course, leads to... let's go back to Kramer for a second. So Kramer... was honest to Emily, and she seemed to not be happy about it, but she's like, it is what it is. They do it. It was amazing. And then he goes, okay, I'll see you later. And he leaves. He goes back to his apartment. Now, the problem is, though, earlier in the episode, Morty Seinfeld claims he got some, traveling exercise kit. He has some exercise that he would tie to the doorknob and use it every morning. Well... he tied it the first night that Kramer spent alone after, telling Emily they can't sleep together because she has the Jimmy legs. Morty is used Kramer's doorknob to place his exercise machine there. And then Kramer now wants to stay over at Emily's, but Emily says she likes sleeping alone. But then, whenever Frank and Estelle tell George that they were going to be moving to Del Boca Vista, they were allowing Kramer to use their house. And Kramer then finds out that Frank and Estelle don't sleep in the same bed because Estelle's got the Jimmy arms. So Kramer realizes, we can do our stuff here, and we can fall asleep here, just in separate beds. And later there was a scene where it kind of showed that it was kind of like Kramer and Emily were living together. And, they seem like they finally figured them out. One of the only, happy endings to a story we really see in Seinfeld. But meanwhile, after Frank and Estelle, like, they immediately move down and buy a condo at Del Boca Vista, Frank walks past the Cadillac and gets freaked out, seeing that there was someone sleeping inside the Cadillac, which turned out, of course, to be Jerry. Jerry, of course, puts the Cadillac back at his parents' place, and he flies home again. And then, of course, George and Elaine, meanwhile, were trying to, well, this is before, of course, George's parents decided to go down. Like, when George was torn what to do about his parents, Elaine was trying to talk to him about what to do about getting rid of Mr. Seinfeld, which, of course, caused a little bit of arguing. But then George suggested the idea of, why don't you have a late meeting? Old people don't like late meetings. So, of course, with Peterman back, they had a late meeting, and Morty was, like, complaining, because it's after dinner, can we get something to eat here, this, and that, and whatnot, and Elaine was trying to kind of actually have the meetings go on, and it led to Morty Seinfeld, basically, him and Peterman agreeing to mutually part ways. So, he left, and he went back to Florida. So, of course, the final scene, of course, besides, Kramer enjoying, his time at the Costanza's old house, with Emily, Jerry, Elaine, and George are sitting there, and Elaine's, like, sitting there reading the stocks, knowing that if she was still the president of the Peterman company, she'd be getting all this money, but now, not. Kind of the way how it was whenever George found out the Rosses were rich, but now that he's not getting married to her, what he's supposed to get is not happening now. And, of course, George says that's a shame, and then Elaine thinks that George is taking it to him. So then, of course, George is in a good mood because his parents are down in Florida, and Jerry says his parents don't know that he bought back the Cadillac. And then, of course, they end up attaching the Cadillac to their condo, and then Frank is so freaked out by seeing a man, which ended up being Jerry, sleep in the back of his Cadillac, he says they're moving back to Queens. So George's little, patch of freedom again, over again, just like that. And that's the money episode. A decent episode, not one of my favorites. But I do like how they kind of, incorporated, like, the title is kind of like a theme of, like, everything. And with Elaine and the stocks, Jerry and the Cadillac money, and then, of course, George with the, find out his parents are actually rich. The biggest fun fact, really, from this is Sandy Barron, the guy who played Jack Klompus, almost didn't end up being in this episode. This episode had to originally be rewritten because Sandy Barron was not in good health at the time that this was happening. He actually went missing during a rehearsal. After he arrived at the studios, he became very ill while still in his car, and he was eventually discovered by the show's production coordinator, and gave medical treatment, and he ended up going into a coma days before production. This episode, of course, was being rewritten for another character, but then just in time, he came out of the coma. And this episode was actually, I believe, written, I think, before the comeback. So I'm wondering if, the whole, story about, Other Side of Darkness and Kramer and the coma victim, and even, of course, the fact about Riley's wife being in the coma, I wonder if that kind of came from, because they just recently dealt with what happened with Sandy Barron. But, of course, Sandy made a recovery. He was able to do the episode, but he actually died, like, in 2001, I think, from emphysema, or how the heck it's called. And like I said, also, it's kind of like being referred to as a sequel to the Cadillac, because of it being the most watched episode of the season last year. So there's a lot of, like, throwbacks in it, as I expected, as I mentioned before. But that's the money episode, guys. I'll see you guys in the next episode, which I believe is the Van Buren Boys. I think that one's next. And, of course, George will have to pick the first ever Susan Ross Scholar. So we'll find out next. Once again, guys, what were your thoughts on the Cadillac, the money episode? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe more content on my channel. And follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Until then, guys, I'm checking out. I'll catch you all later. Have a great rest of your evening. And peace out, everybody.